I inherited $15 million, pretended to be broke, and now my family's suing me. What I did next left them speechless. My life in Milwaukee had always been comfortably predictable. At 34 years old, I worked as a software engineer, earning a steady income that supported my modest apartment and a daily routine I rarely deviated from. My world wasn't flashy or thrilling, but it was stable, with the occasional highlights, experimenting with new recipes or binge-watching TV series after a long day. If anyone had asked me to describe my life a few months ago, I would have called it unremarkable but mine. Then, everything changed. It started with a phone call I nearly ignored. Seeing the unfamiliar number, I assumed it was yet another telemarketer trying to sell me something I didn't need. But something made me answer. The voice on the other end was composed, professional, and deliberate. The woman introduced herself as Elizabeth Hayes, calling from Wallace and Hayes Law Firm. She explained that the call concerned my great-aunt Helen Wallace. I froze. Aunt Helen? I hadn't seen or thought about her in years. She was the enigmatic family member people spoke about in hushed tones, the eccentric, one who lived on her terms. My parents had often referred to her in ways that seemed less like admiration and more like veiled criticism. According to them, she was independent to a fault, unwilling to engage in the family's constant drama. Elizabeth's next words were a gut punch. Aunt Helen had passed away the previous month. Despite the distant relationship, it was still a shock. Then came the bigger surprise. Helen had named me as the primary beneficiary in her will. I struggled to find words, stammering my way through the call as Elizabeth explained that I would need to visit her office to discuss the details. I scheduled the appointment, still unsure how to process this sudden turn of events. When the day came, I walked into the downtown law firm feeling completely out of place. The office was sleek and modern, its staff dressed in impeccably tailored suits. Meanwhile, I had shown up in my usual jeans and button-down shirt, looking more like a casual observer than someone inheriting a fortune. Elizabeth greeted me warmly and led me to her office. She wasted no time in getting to the point. Helen, she explained, had been a remarkable woman who valued independence, hard work, and self-reliance. She had also been an astute investor, quietly amassing a fortune over the years while maintaining a modest lifestyle. Elizabeth slid a folder across the desk and said matter-of-factly, "She's left you her entire estate. It's valued at approximately $15 million. I blinked, certain I had misheard. 15 what? I managed to stammer. Million, Elizabeth repeated, her tone steady, as if this were an everyday occurrence. The magnitude of it left me reeling. As Elizabeth continued to outline the details, I learned that Helen had intentionally excluded the rest of the family. She had made it clear in her will that this was her way of severing ties with family dynamics she had long considered toxic. Toxic was an understatement. My family was the kind of dysfunctional you'd see on a reality show. My older brother, Brian, was a self-absorbed real estate agent who felt the world owed him success. My cousin Maddie was a social media influencer obsessed with her curated image and addicted to validation. And my mother, Susan, was a master manipulator who wielded guilt like a weapon, always casting herself as the martyr while pulling everyone's strings. I could already imagine how they'd react if they found out about the inheritance. In fact, I didn't have to imagine. I knew exactly what would happen. That's why I decided to keep it a secret. Instead, I devised a plan. A week later, I resigned from my job under the guise of pursuing personal projects. While not entirely untrue, my real project was to test the loyalty of the people closest to me. First, I sold my Milwaukee apartment and moved to Chicago, deliberately choosing a rundown unit in a dilapidated building on the city's outskirts. The paint was peeling, the plumbing was laughably bad, and my neighbors seemed to communicate exclusively through shouting matches. I traded my reliable car for a beat-up clunker that looked like it had survived one too many road trips. To sell the story, I posted updates on social media claiming I'd been laid off due to company budget cuts. I even went as far as creating a fake severance letter to make it convincing. Predictably, my family's responses ranged from indifferent to downright cruel. Brian texted me a dismissive, "Tough break, man." Maybe you should have worked harder. Maddie commented on one of my posts with a generic, "Yikes, hope you bounce back soon," before immediately posting about her new designer handbag. My mom called, but not to console me. Instead, she launched into a monologue about her own struggles and how she couldn't possibly help me because she was barely getting by herself. The only exception was my younger sister, Emily. At 25, she was still in nursing school, juggling classes and a part-time job to make ends meet. When I told her I was struggling, she didn't hesitate. "I don't have much," she said, "but I can send you $100. It wasn't the amount that mattered, it was the thought. Meanwhile, my best friend, Jason, showed up unannounced with groceries and spent the afternoon helping me fix a leaky faucet. He didn't ask questions or make me feel pitied. He simply showed up, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. Over the following weeks, my family's true colors became glaringly obvious. When I hinted that money was tight and I might need help covering rent, Brian and Maddie found convenient excuses. Brian claimed he was saving for a Tesla, while Maddie complained about the costs of maintaining her influencer lifestyle, this after posting photos from her Bahamas vacation. Then came the final blow. I stumbled upon a private group chat on a borrowed laptop. It was a place where my family exchanged gossip, and I found several messages mocking me. "He's probably just lazy," Brian had written. Maddie added, "Maybe he'll finally figure out how the real world works." My mom chimed in, "I warned him about this tech bubble. He should have listened to me." Reading those messages felt like a punch to the gut. These were the people I had grown up with, and they were reveling in what they believed to be my downfall. It was a betrayal that stung more than I cared to admit. But instead of letting it defeat me, I decided to escalate my plan. I staged an eviction, crafting a fake notice and pinning it to my apartment door. My nosy neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, immediately took notice. She thrived on drama and wasted no time spreading the news. Within a day, Emily called, her voice trembling with concern. She offered to help me pack, talk to my landlord, or do anything else I needed. It broke my heart to lie to her, but I reassured her that I had it under control. Meanwhile, the rest of the family? Nothing. No calls, no texts, not even a comment on social media. It was clear now, my family wasn't just failing this test, they were flunking spectacularly. I waited for a few more days, hoping someone else in the family might reach out. The silence was deafening. Instead of concern or support, I saw glimpses of their lives carrying on as if nothing had happened. Brian posted a photo of his new watch with the smug caption, "Hard work pays off." Maddie uploaded a video of herself unboxing luxury skincare products, gushing about her latest sponsorship. Susan, unsurprisingly, didn't acknowledge my situation at all, despite being fully aware of it. The indifference stung, but it also vindicated my decision to continue the act. Behind the scenes, my life was a far cry from the struggling persona I portrayed online. That same week, I booked a first-class flight to Paris. For 7 days, I strolled along the Seine, dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, and stayed in a luxurious suite with a breathtaking view of the Eiffel Tower. From there, I hopped to Milan, where I explored art galleries, and then to Santorini, where I basked in the sun on pristine beaches. Each moment felt surreal, a world away from the dingy apartment I had left behind. When I returned to the US, I treated myself to a custom-made suit and finally purchased the vintage Rolex I dreamed of owning since college. It was a luxury I had only fantasized about before, and now it was mine. Yet, none of this ever made it to social media. My online presence remained carefully curated, vague updates about job interviews, motivational quotes about perseverance, and the occasional lament about hard times. To anyone watching, I was still barely scraping by. The final push came at a family dinner a few weeks later. Susan hosted it at her house, as part of the monthly tradition that rarely ended without some sort of drama. From the moment I walked in, it was clear that nothing had changed. Brian was holding court, bragging about his latest business deal. Maddie was glued to her phone, scrolling through Instagram. Susan greeted me with a limp hug before launching into a monologue about her latest hardships. Dinner started uneventfully enough, everyone talking over each other, as usual. Then, True to form, Brian saw an opportunity to take a jab. "So, Nathan," he said, smirking, "how's the job hunt going? Or should I say, the no-job hunt?" Maddie snickered without looking up from her phone, and Susan let out a disapproving sigh. Something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect, or the blatant lack of it. I put down my fork and looked around the table, my patience gone. "Do you really want to know how I'm doing?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. Brian leaned back in his chair, still wearing that smug grin.
"Sure."
"Enlighten us." I took a deep breath. I'm not struggling. I'm not broke. And I never lost my job. The room fell silent. This whole thing was a test, a way to see who actually cared about me without expecting something in return. Confusion gave way to outrage. "What the hell are you talking about?" Brian demanded, his voice rising. "I inherited $15 million from Aunt Helen," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing." The room erupted. Brian shot out of his chair, his face red with anger. "Are you kidding me? You lied to us? You've been sitting on millions while we thought you were struggling?" Susan clutched her chest dramatically, tears forming in her eyes. "How could you do this, Nathan? To your own family?" Maddie, ever the opportunist, pulled out her phone and started recording, her face a mask of disbelief. "You're seriously insane," she muttered. "You think this is some kind of game?" I stood, my own temper flaring. "You all failed. Not one of you, except Emily, offered real help when I supposedly needed it. Instead, you mocked me, gossiped about me, and ignored me. So don't sit here and pretend to be the victims now." Brian pointed a finger at me, his voice venomous. "You're manipulative. You think money gives you the right to play God? You're no better than the rest of us." I laughed bitterly. "If I'm so terrible, why are you mad I didn't share the money with you?" That struck a nerve. Brian stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Susan retreated to the kitchen, sobbing theatrically. Maddie kept recording, likely planning to turn the confrontation into content for her followers. Only Emily stayed quiet, her expression a mix of shock and sadness. "I didn't do this to hurt you," I told her softly. "I just needed to know who I could trust." She nodded slowly. "I get it," she said. "But was it worth it?" I didn't have an answer, not yet. By the time I left Susan's house, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Brian had sent a string of angry texts. Maddie had posted a vague update on social media. Can't believe some people. Family is supposed to mean something. Susan left me a voicemail, alternating between sobbing and guilt-tripping. I had ignited a firestorm, and I wasn't sure how to put it out. The fallout escalated overnight. The next morning, I woke up to find that Maddie's cryptic post had sparked a frenzy. A local tabloid picked up the story, running the headline, "Millionaire software engineer fakes poverty to test his family. Chaos ensues." The article painted me as a villain, a manipulative narcissist who had humiliated his family for entertainment. Conveniently, it left out the part where they had mocked me and refused to help when I needed it. My phone was inundated with messages, not just from family but from old classmates, distant relatives, and even former coworkers. "Hey man, just saw the article. Crazy stuff. Let's catch up soon. Wow, Nathan. Didn't know you had it in you. By the way, can I borrow some cash?" The chaos I had set in motion was spiraling out of control. What had started as a test of loyalty was turning into a war I wasn't sure I could win. The fallout from my confession had escalated into a storm of chaos, and it was only getting worse. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages. Some were fake displays of concern, while others were outright attempts at begging. Old acquaintances, distant relatives, and even near strangers reached out, each one carefully couching their requests in layers of supposed sympathy. "I could really use a loan. Is it true you really did that to your family?" I couldn't decide what was worse, the feigned empathy or the shameless greed. Brian, of course, wasn't going to let things lie. Less than a week after the family dinner, an official-looking envelope arrived in the mail. I opened it to find a lawsuit. Brian was suing me for emotional distress, claiming that my manipulative behavior had caused him financial losses and irreparable harm. The amount? $750,000. I couldn't help but laugh out loud at the absurdity of it. This was the same man who had mocked me for being lazy and irresponsible, and now he was painting himself as a victim. But the laughter didn't last long. The thought of court hearings, lawyers, and having my personal life dragged through the mud made my stomach churn. I forwarded the lawsuit to my lawyer, Alan Greaves, who had been managing my inheritance. His response was quick and reassuring. "This is ridiculous, but we'll handle it." While Alan worked on the legal side, I braced myself for what would come next. What I didn't anticipate was the madness that unfolded just days later. Maddie decided to up the ante by posting a dramatic video titled "Family Betrayal: My Story." The thumbnail showed her wiping away a fake tear, and the 20-minute video was an expertly edited web of lies. She claimed I had abandoned my family, refused to help them in their time of need, and flaunted my wealth while they struggled. The video went viral. The comment section was a dumpster fire of insults from people who didn't know me at all. "He's what's wrong with rich people today. This guy sounds like a narcissist. Hope his family sues him for everything he's got." As if that wasn't enough, Maddie launched a GoFundMe campaign titled "Help Us Heal from Family Betrayal." The description was a masterclass in manipulation, painting the family as innocent victims of my cruelty. Within days, the campaign had raised thousands of dollars. People were donating real money based on her lies, and I could do nothing but watch in disbelief. Meanwhile, my neighbors started showing their true colors. A couple I had barely spoken to knocked on my door with a bottle of cheap wine, congratulating me on my newfound wealth before casually pitching me their amazing business idea. Another neighbor slipped a note under my door, asking if I could cover their overdue rent as a kind gesture. These were people who hadn't even bothered to introduce themselves when I first moved in, yet suddenly they were acting like old friends. It didn't stop there. Old acquaintances from college and high school began crawling out of the woodwork, all with suspiciously timed "let's catch up" messages. One ex-friend even invited me to dinner, only to confess halfway through that he was drowning in medical bills and could really use some help. It was exhausting, trying to sift through who was genuine and who just wanted a slice of the pie. The breaking point came when I caught my Uncle Richard trying to break into my apartment. I came home one evening to find him hunched over my front door, fiddling with the lock. When he saw me, he froze for a moment before glaring at me like I was the one in the wrong. "I have a right to some of that money," he snapped. "It's a family inheritance. You're just hoarding it like a selfish brat." I didn't bother arguing. I called the cops. Richard was arrested on the spot, but not before shouting at me about how I was tearing the family apart. That was it. This wasn't petty gossip or hurt feelings anymore. This was full-blown madness. The first court hearing for Brian's lawsuit was a circus. His lawyer painted him as a broken man, claiming that my actions had caused him severe emotional distress and significant financial hardship. My legal team countered with hard evidence, bank records showing that Brian had been spending thousands on luxury items while supposedly suffering. The courtroom devolved into chaos when Brian and other family members started shouting accusations at me. At one point, Maddie, sitting in the audience, yelled, "You're a liar." The judge had to call for order multiple times. It felt like I was trapped in a cheap soap opera, watching people I had grown up with twist reality into something unrecognizable. Amid the chaos, Emily remained my only anchor. She defended me on social media, posting about how she had been the only one to offer help when she thought I was struggling. Her posts didn't go viral like Maddie's smear campaign, but they meant everything to me. She also sent me screenshots of a private conversation with Brian, where he admitted to fabricating his financial losses for the lawsuit. That discovery was a game changer. My lawyer quickly added it to our growing pile of evidence. Through it all, Jason stayed by my side. He helped me sort through the flood of messages, attended court hearings with me, and reminded me that not everyone was out to get me. One evening, when I was particularly defeated, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're stronger than this. Don't let them win." He was right. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about principle. My family had made their choices, and now it was time for me to stand my ground. This wasn't just about winning a court case anymore. It was about standing up for myself and cutting the ties that had suffocated me for years. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. My lawyer, Alan, stood tall and confident as he presented our case. Evidence of Brian's extravagant spending habits, emails, and even the group chat where he mocked my supposed struggles were laid bare. Every detail painted a clear picture of the reality behind his baseless claims. Brian's face twisted with a mix of anger and desperation as the judge dismissed the lawsuit. Frivolous and without merit, the judge declared, a decisive blow that brought a wave of relief rushing through me. But the victory was bittersweet. While I had won the legal battle, the damage to my reputation and peace of mind couldn't be undone so easily. My name had been dragged through the mud, and my family wasn't about to back down quietly. As I stepped outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like vultures, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward me. "Nathan, how do you feel about today's ruling?" one shouted. "Do you regret deceiving your family?" another asked. I ignored them, pushing past the chaos toward the waiting car. Alan followed close behind, shaking his head. "They're not going to stop," he muttered. "I know," I replied, climbing into the car. "But neither am I." The aftermath of the court case only fueled my family's resentment. Brian took to social media, posting a tirade about how the justice system had failed him. Maddie doubled down on her narrative, releasing yet another video. This one painted me as a villain hell-bent on destroying the family. Her online followers eagerly devoured the story, their comments seething with venom. What kind of monster does this to their own family? Greed changes people. Hope he loses everything. Maddie texted me one evening, her words dripping with malice. "You think this will end here? We'll keep fighting until everyone knows the truth about you." I didn't respond. There was no point engaging with her. Instead, I turned my focus inward, prioritizing my safety and well-being. I hired a private security consultant who recommended installing advanced surveillance systems at my countryside home, cameras, motion detectors, and a reinforced gate. It cost a small fortune, but it was worth every penny for peace of mind. Alan also suggested filing restraining orders against certain family members. "This isn't just about money anymore," he said. "It's harassment, and we can prove it." Taking legal action against my own family felt extreme, but after everything they had done, I knew it was necessary. The restraining orders marked a turning point. With each ruling in my favor, Brian and Maddie's allies began to dwindle. Even Susan, their staunchest supporter, started to pull back, but not before making one final attempt to manipulate me. She left a voicemail, her voice thick with feigned emotion. "Nathan, this has gone far enough. We're family. You can't let this tear us apart. Your Aunt Helen wouldn't have wanted this." Hearing her invoke Helen's name was the final straw. Helen had left me the money because she saw the truth about our family. For Susan to use her as a weapon to guilt me was unforgivable. I didn't call her back. While my family smear campaign raged on, I found solace in unexpected places. Jason remained a steadfast presence, always ready to listen or offer a dose of perspective. "You're doing the right thing," he told me one evening as we shared beers on my porch. "You can't fix what's broken. Sometimes you just have to walk away." His words struck a chord. Support also came from strangers. I received messages from people who had read about my situation and shared their own stories of toxic families. Some thanked me for standing up for myself, while others simply wished me well. Their kindness was a stark contrast to the vitriol I had faced. One day, while sorting through old belongings, I came across a box of letters from Aunt Helen. Most were more like journal entries than correspondence, filled with her musings on life and family. In one letter, she wrote, "Family is not a guarantee of loyalty or love. True family is found in those who respect and support you, whether they share your blood or not." Her words resonated deeply. For so long, I had clung to the idea that family was sacred, that I had to endure their toxicity because we were related. Helen had seen through that illusion long ago, and now so had I. As the legal battles dragged on, the cracks in my family's facade deepened. Maddie accused Brian of mishandling the GoFundMe money, and Brian fired back, accusing Maddie of exploiting the situation for personal gain. Their infighting spilled onto social media, alienating their once loyal followers. One commenter wrote, "I donated to help your family, but now it just looks like you're all greedy." The tide was turning. When my countersuit against Brian was settled, the court ruled in my favor, awarding me damages for defamation and harassment. Brian's financial house of cards collapsed. He declared bankruptcy shortly after, his lavish lifestyle finally catching up with him. Maddie, seeing the writing on the wall, quietly deleted her GoFundMe and most of her videos. Susan, true to form, attempted to save face, posting a long-winded message about how she had always tried to hold the family together and was heartbroken by what had happened. But none of it mattered anymore. I had made my decision. The final blow came when a distant relative leaked private financial records to a gossip site. The betrayal cut deep, but it also solidified my resolve. I filed another lawsuit, this time for damages and to secure my privacy moving forward. The court granted me anonymity in all future proceedings, a small but significant victory. With the legal battles behind me, I took the last step to sever ties completely. I filed paperwork to estrange myself from my immediate family. It wasn't just a legal decision, it was a personal declaration that I was done. No more phone calls. No more guilt trips. No more attempts at reconciliation. For the first time in years, I felt free. Standing on my porch, I looked out at the quiet countryside. The sun was setting, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The chaos was behind me now, and the peace was mine to keep. The chapter of my life involving my family had come to an end, one I knew I would never revisit. Walking away wasn't just about cutting ties with the people who had hurt me, it was about stepping into a future defined by peace, purpose, and the people who had proven they truly cared about me. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like I could breathe. Life after the final court ruling was quieter, but the emotional weight of the past years didn't disappear overnight. Cutting ties with my family was a relief, but processing the betrayals, the chaos, and the absurdity of it all took time. Moving forward started with a promise I'd made to myself, to do something meaningful with Aunt Helen's legacy. I donated $1.5 million to a local charity dedicated to education and housing for underprivileged youth, a cause I knew Helen would have championed. Honoring her memory this way felt like the right way to begin this new chapter. The donations sparked some positive attention within the local community, a refreshing change from the sensationalized drama my family had caused. For once, headlines with my name weren't tied to scandal, but to hope. Stories about the programs my donation funded and the lives it would change began to circulate, and seeing that impact gave me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. With that chapter closed, I turned my attention to building a life of my own. I finalized the purchase of a secluded property in northern Vermont, tucked away in a serene valley surrounded by lush, forested hills. The house was modern yet understated, designed to let natural light flood in through its large windows. Its wraparound porch offered breathtaking views of the landscape, especially at sunrise and sunset. Moving in felt like shedding an old skin, leaving behind the remnants of a life I no longer wanted. To ensure my peace wasn't disrupted, I invested in additional security measures, a reinforced gate, a private road leading to the house, and state-of-the-art surveillance systems. It was a significant expense, but after everything I'd endured, peace of mind was priceless. Jason remained a central figure in my life. After all he had done for me during the worst of times, I wanted to give something back. Using part of my inheritance, I set up a trust fund in his name. When I told him about it, he was stunned into silence. "You didn't have to do this," he finally managed to say. "I wanted to," I replied. "You were there when no one else was. This is my way of saying thank you." Jason eventually used part of the trust to start his own tech company, fulfilling a dream he'd had for years. Watching him build something from the ground up and thrive was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life. As I settled into my new home, I began reconnecting with distant relatives who hadn't been part of the chaos. One of them was Aunt Karen, Helen's youngest sister. She reached out after hearing about the lawsuits, offering her support and expressing her disappointment in the rest of the family. "Helen always knew they'd come after you once they found out," she said during one of our calls. "That's why she trusted you and no one else." Karen wasn't looking for money or favors. She just wanted to connect. Our conversations became a small but meaningful part of my healing process. Not everyone, however, was content to let me go. Brian made one final, desperate attempt to worm his way back into my life. One evening, he showed up unannounced at my gate, looking disheveled and broken. Through the intercom, he pleaded, "Nate, we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I replied firmly. "Please," he begged.
"I'm ruined.
"I just need a little help to get back on my feet." For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered the group chat, the lies, the lawsuits. I remembered how he had relished mocking me when he thought I was at my lowest. "Leave," I said coldly. "If you don't, I'll call the police." He muttered something under his breath, but eventually drove off. The next day, I filed another restraining order against him. It was the last time I ever saw him. Despite occasional reminders of my family's toxicity, my life finally started to feel like my own. I began exploring new opportunities, investing in ethical businesses that aligned with my values. Clean energy startups, local Vermont businesses, and community initiatives became my focus. It felt good to create something meaningful and sustainable, something that could make a difference. In the midst of all this, I met someone. Her name was Rachel, a corporate lawyer introduced to me through mutual friends. What began as casual conversations over coffee quickly grew into something deeper. Rachel wasn't interested in my money or the drama that had surrounded my family. She liked me for who I was. For the first time in years, I felt like I could trust someone completely. As my relationship with Rachel blossomed, the toxic remnants of my past faded further into the background. The public interest in my family's drama eventually died down, replaced by newer scandals and stories. But the scars remained. One day, while unpacking an old box, I found another letter from Aunt Helen. In it, she wrote, "Peace is not something you find in others. It's something you create for yourself." Her words stayed with me. For so long, I had sought validation from people who didn't deserve it. I had clung to the idea that family, by virtue of blood, was sacred. But now I understood that peace wasn't about fixing broken relationships. It was about building something better. With time, the wounds healed. Jason's business flourished, my relationship with Rachel deepened, and my investments began making tangible impacts on the world around me. Even some of the distant relatives I reconnected with became genuine parts of my life. Looking back, the journey had been brutal, but it had also been transformative. Aunt Helen's gift had given me more than financial freedom. It had given me clarity, the ability to see who truly mattered. Standing on the porch of my secluded home, watching the sun set over the hills, I felt a sense of closure. For the first time, I wasn't defined by the past. I was free to shape my future, and I knew exactly what I wanted it to look like.